You probably all know what that's all about, and that's because for today's movie review, I'm going to be talking about Rogue One, a Star Wars story. This is the very first Star Wars anthology film that Disney has first introduced to us back when they first bought the rights to Star Wars. Not only did they promise us that new trilogy that we started with Force Awakens from last year, and we're going to get a continuation of that of next year with Episode 8. But now we have these Star Wars anthology films, which are stories that happened in between those earlier Star Wars films that we once saw, and we get to further learn how the Star Wars universe further formed itself, maybe not through the Skywalker family, but through other significant characters and objects and things that are existing within the Star Wars universe. So in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, guys, this film's all about a young woman named Jyn Erso, and she is the daughter of a technician slash construction worker person or whatever he is, and he is responsible to how the Death Star got formed. You know, how the Death Star had its design and everything. And so very early on in her life, the father kind of vanishes. He's working on this Death Star for the Empire. This film is roughly between episodes 3 and episodes 4, so it's after Revenge of the Sith, but still way before A New Hope, but enough where right where this film leaves off, I guess you could safely say, is where A New Hope begins, like right when that first opening scene happens. Um, so they take this guy away. He's working on the Death Star. This young girl doesn't get to see her father for a very long time, and she's taken in by this character played by Forrest Whitaker, who kind of briefly takes care of her for a while, make sure that she's safe from the Empire and so forth. And so she grows up, and she's getting in trouble. She's doing these undercover missions. She's kind of a person with her own agenda. So in a way, she's very much her own rebel, and she forms an even bigger group of rebels when she has knowledge of where exactly these Death Star plans are to hopefully find a weakness within it. And since she is the daughter of the man who made this thing, a lot of people are trusting her because there's this, with her father creating it and so forth, and her being related to him and so forth. That there's a strong possibility that they can possibly destroy the Death Star now. So she forms this team of rebels. They go out on a quest, and they hope to get the Death Star plans in the right hands, because if they do, the Death Star can be destroyed. And as we saw in the original trilogy, well, they certainly did the right direction here by going on this adventure to make sure that those plans got in the right hands. So overall, guys, I enjoyed Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Unfortunately, it only answers a couple more questions I probably had about the original trilogy, which isn't bad, but I really was hoping for a little bit more of a really huge connection as to how the Star Wars universe was formed and so forth. I really enjoyed this movie. I really liked what they did. I thought Gareth Edwards was a very appropriate choice for this film, but unfortunately, there's nothing super necessary about it that, you know, automatically gives it its existence. I think that's something about this movie that it's a really enjoyable experience, but unfortunately doesn't add too much to the Star Wars universe. But for my positives and negatives of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, I like that older 1977 Star Wars look and tone. I liked how Gareth Edwards made us, because I really liked what he did with his Godzilla film back in 2014. I liked how that look of this movie really felt like we were back in that original Star Wars movie. It had that kind of the grayish film tone and so forth, and the colors were nice and bright whenever they're on like desert planets. They're very much in the spirit of Planet Tatooine from Episode 4. So I like that look and tone that Gareth Edwards was able to achieve within this movie. I think it's a very huge plus for this movie. The visual effects are very good in this movie too. There's great action scenes. They once again did a great job making sure that these visual effects looked very, very good. Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones, I thought her character was very interesting. She had an interesting backstory, so I like what they did with her character in this movie. I also like the Mads Mikkelsen father character, who is the father of Jyn Erso, who was responsible for this Death Star. And I can't get into too much about him because it'd be spoiler territory, but kind of his reasoning behind why the Death Star was made the way it was, and why some people are still questionable about how the Death Star was designed to this day. I think they definitely explore why this man made it that way, and I really can't explain it more than that without giving the film away. So for those who want to learn more, I guess you have to see Rogue One, a Star Wars story now to figure out what exactly I'm talking about. But his backstory here as to why he made it the way he did, I thought was very interesting. And then K2SO is a new droid character. He's very much in the spirit of C3PO. He's voiced by Alan Tudyk, who voiced King Candy in the Wreck-It Ralph movie. And he recently voiced the little rooster guy in Moana, for those who saw that. I thought his voice work as K2SO was a lot of fun, very funny, probably the most funny Star Wars character that works that we've seen in a while. I liked how he's very much in the spirit of C3PO, but is a little bit more comedic and so forth. So I thought it was a nice addition to the Star Wars universe. I also liked Gareth Edwards' sense of screen scaling. He's very good about um, characters, who are pretty small or just, on the ground, and they're looking up at something that's really huge and just, a size that's beyond your imagination and so forth with these, giant machines that are at war with these human beings and so forth. Or whenever we're looking at the Death Star up in the sky and so forth. He's very, very good about scaling these humongously huge things. Like that's what he did in Godzilla so well too. Is when you're a human being on the beach looking up at this big monster, you are just a little tiny thing compared to this huge, gigantic thing. So I think he's very good about scaling these huge places and huge things so very well, and that's something that he did so well in Godzilla that he thankfully brought to Star Wars here, and it definitely works very, very well. And I also thought this film answered a couple more questions I had about the Star Wars universe. Certainly things about the Death Star. Certainly things about, and this is something I think not a lot of people have talked about yet. It also talks about how lightsabers work. How there's a little stone within the lightsaber that can make a lightsaber work and so forth. So they briefly go over that and so forth. So I liked how it answered a couple more questions and so forth. It doesn't completely guarantee why this movie exists, but luckily we do get a couple more answers to questions that I've kind of personally had myself about the Star Wars universe as well. For my negatives of Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, I briefly covered earlier, unfortunately, this film doesn't feel necessary. I really feel like if you loved that original Star Wars film already, you're still going to love it the way you did. And if you didn't like the original Star Wars, you're probably still not going to like it. This film's not going to change your mind, unfortunately. There's a couple things they bring up as to why things happened the way they did in Episode 4 and why certain things are the way they are after Episode 3, but there's nothing super important about this movie that really feels absolutely necessary as to how Episode 4 happened or to how Episode 3 concluded. Another negative I had about this movie is some of these new characters don't have enough distinct characterization. I know I love Jyn Erso, I love the dad played by Mads Mikkelsen, I loved K2SO, but unfortunately characters like the Diego Luna character and the Riz Ahmed character and the Donnie Yen character and some of these other rebels that join Jyn Erso on her quest. Unfortunately, some of them don't have very distinct characterization. Some of them are just the same exact character as everybody else. There's a couple little traits about them that make them stand out maybe a little bit more than the other person, but unfortunately, we don't really learn about a lot of these people. We don't learn why some of them are friends and some of them don't get along too well. Unfortunately, they're just kind of characters that are there on the spacecraft with Jyn Erso, and well, that's about it. Another negative I had with Rogue One: A Star Wars Story is Michael Giacchino's score, and I love this guy. He's very much the next generation's John Williams. He's definitely like a John Williams styled composer when it comes to movies. His score for Zootopia alone earlier this year was absolutely amazing to me. Unfortunately, for somebody who's so talented and so skilled with coming up with scores that sound like a John Williams score, and Star Wars is always well known for being scored by John Williams. Unfortunately, his tribute to Williams isn't very present here. I thought his score was very rushed, which apparently online he only had a couple of weeks to make the score for, which is never a good thing, especially when it comes to a Star Wars movie. Yeah, his score here was just very rushed, very uninspired. I kind of forgot about it. It really was missing that whole John Williams touch when it came to the score, and that kind of hurts the movie a little bit. There's also no Jedi characters in this movie. And I think that's something that makes those earlier Star Wars films so much fun. Is we get to learn about Rey, we get to learn about Luke Skywalker, we get to learn about Anakin Skywalker, we get to learn about Obi-Wan Kenobi, we get to learn about Yoda. None of those characters are in this movie, and that's really too bad. It's a Star Wars movie. I understand that some of those characters aren't Jedi's yet and so forth, but there's no Jedi characters in this movie, and I think that's what makes Star Wars so appealing to some people is these Jedi Knight characters. They're so interesting in how why they want to be able to wield a lightsaber within this universe and so forth. Without Jedi characters, unfortunately, the Star Wars universe just doesn't feel as fun as a result. I also thought the second act of this film was very, very slow. Unfortunately, and I guess some people who have seen this movie more than once are definitely saying this now. Unfortunately, not a lot happens in the second act of this movie. Most of the big important things that are happening in this movie happen within the first act and within the third act. That middle second act is just very, very slow. Not a lot happens, and it takes a very long time to get to that third act. And unfortunately, it makes the film feel a little bit longer than maybe it should. There's also no opening Star Wars crawl that's made so famous in the other Star Wars movies, and that's really too bad. As a result, it doesn't really feel too much like a Star Wars film, and it just doesn't feel as fun or as inspired as those earlier Star Wars films did as a result. There's also some characters that had to be CGI'd in, since some of these people are, gone or don't look like that anymore, and it's very noticeable. I'm not going to say who it is or what it is, but whenever a character has a lot of CGI elements added to their face or their outfit or so forth, it's very noticeable. And unfortunately, those greater other visual effects like the droids and everything else and the spacecrafts and all that other stuff, it kind of cheapens that CGI a little bit, because those other CGI, like in the characters, is very noticeable, unfortunately. And that goes to my last point. This is a somewhat predictable movie. Almost everything I thought the film was going to play out, unfortunately, happened the way it did, and that's really not. It doesn't really add an element of surprise to this movie, unfortunately. So, Rogue One, a Star Wars story. I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's worth seeing. I think if you love Star Wars like I do, or a lot of other people do, I think you'll have fun with it. Like I said, though, it doesn't really feel necessary, though. I really feel like I like what they made, but I feel like it doesn't really add too much to the Star Wars universe, unfortunately. So 8.5 out of 10. It's a great film, but probably not a film I'm going to put at the top 10 best of the year at the end of the year for my favorite films of the year. So, like the movie, but didn't absolutely fall in love with it.